So BT is having a very positive impact on the publisher landscape. And you can see the growth projections. The numbers in 2008 are very low, but they're catching up. Of course, a lot of the behavioral targeting data isn't publicly disclosed, and so it's hard for these bodies to make these estimates, but it's not far off. And if you look at the overall online marketing spend, it's about $30 billion in 2009, thereabouts, and about half of that or a little bit more is sponsored search. So you can see that in 2009, it's about 1/30 of all the online marketing is behaviorally related. But over time, that is going to grow. And I think it actually, of course, I'm bullish on this technology, but I think it'll grow faster than the slide says. The slide was put together June of 2008. So let's talk about the approaches to the behavioral targeting. So they can be classified into two broad categories. First is only a single event versus multiple events. So that at first sounds kind of counterintuitive. Why would anyone ever want to use just a single event in behavioral targeting when you have access to lots of them? In fact, retargeting, which is what we call this single event behavioral targeting, is the best form of behavioral targeting you can do. And the reason is kind of straightforward, that the single event is a very important event. It's you've been to a retailer site and added something to cart and not completed a transaction. Or you've been to their site and begun a registration process, but you've been to this site. So not only is it I know this person's interested in this topic area, maybe a flat screen TV or a car, but I know the retailer that they have been to before. They've got some minimal amount of trust associated with this retailer and also a product category. So it's retailer plus product category, whereas the other forms of behavioral targeting tend to be more along the lines of just generic product category. So that's why retargeting, although it's the simplest form out there, is actually the best. And there's one case of retargeting where it's actually two events and still called retargeting, and that's where I want to go after everyone who's added a cart, but then filter away everyone who has already purchased. Right? So it's really two events. So I'm cheating by calling it a single event, but it really is kind of very simple. Everything can be stored in a cookie. So there's hundreds of vendors out there who offer this technology, lots of competition on retargeting, but it is the best form out there. My passion, of course, is for the others. So I'll talk about on the next slide the multiple event approaches, but even if two vendors are doing the exact same approach, they will differ on the access to data, what they have as inputs. They will differ on that categorization or that classification process we talked about. They'll differ on the process, which I'll talk about in the next slide. They'll differ on the output. So is it a binary score? This guy's interested in sports or not? Interested in a new car or not? Or is it a degree of confidence? I think 80% likely to buy a new car in the next 60 days. So what is the output that's coming out of these models? What's the scale? So they may have a really good algorithm, but they've got no inputs and no outputs. And so, it's a great model with no data. Or they may have a great model with great inputs, but they've got no ability to deliver that. They have no network on which to take action with this wonderful prediction. And then finally, there's a lot of difference amongst the vendors with what is called PII. That's personally identifiable information. Essentially, anything that can be used to identify you as a real person in the real world. So your name, right? Your street address. There was a recent court case, Microsoft related, which the judge held that PII or IP address is not PII. So while I agree with the court's decision, it was a little odd how they came about it. So they said, well, the reason that an IP address is not PII is because it identifies a computer and not a person. Well, a street address identifies a house. And a street address is PII. So why hang the distinction on that? I think there was a better argument that they could have based the same decision upon, and that is, how easy is it to reverse engineer from this identifier back to a real person? With a street address, I can usually go to white pages or some online source and find out who's the person sitting behind that street address. County records if I have no other easier access point. Same thing with telephone numbers. If I pay enough money, I can do it with Social Security and credit cards, right? But with an IP address, really the only party that knows who's sitting behind the computer is the ISP. And another case held that you need to get a court order to wrench that data out of an ISP, and they can't just give it away for privacy reasons, which I agree with. So that's what PII is, and we'll talk a little bit later about some of the privacy aspects related to behavioral targeting. So let's look at the leading approaches. So the first one that came to the marketplace was the cluster approach. And the cluster approach was very popular with marketers because they're very familiar with this from their geo data sets, right? The Prism clusters, if people have heard of that, or just their own CRM database, customer relationship management database, where they'd try to identify which quote-unquote segment each person was in and then create a specialized campaign to that segment. So the benefit is that it's an automated approach. We can use some statistics to go try to tease apart our data set into n number of quote-unquote clusters. The drawback is that each person is in one and only one cluster. And last time I checked, most people have more than one interest. So the downside of clustering is that I have to guess your predominant interest, the one and only one interest you have at any given moment, and that limits the inventory. If we go back to what a publisher wants, they want more inventory. They want more topics of interest. And you may be most interested in golf clubs, but I don't have any campaigns for golf clubs right now, but I do have one for BMW. If you're also interested in that, even though it's your second interest, it would be a good match. So the more topics I have available, the better my monetization strategy. So Dakota brought this, or popularized this clustering approach online. They were very successful with it and got bought by AOL for over $300 million. So data mining pays off. The next approach was business rules. So marketers love flexibility. They love the power of having these advanced computer systems where they can write custom Boolean logic, if-then logic, to classify people into multiple segments. So this got around that problem where everyone was in one and only one segment. Now you could be in multiple segments. You can be in the golf segment and also in that BMW segment at the same time. That's great. The problem with this business rules approach, though, is it's manual. So if you step into the shoes of someone using this system, what's the rule I write? I want to go find people who are interested in golf. Does that mean they've been to a golf page 3 times in 5 days or 5 times in 3 days? I don't know, right? No one knows. You got to test. So it's very expensive to do all these tests and try to figure out what are the right coefficients, what are the right weightings of all these different types of activities people are doing online. And once you finally get it right, you've done your back testing, you've done all the confirmation that this is the right rule, I'm going to put it into production, great. Well, unfortunately, the web changes very quickly. So take, again, Yahoo homepage. So if you wanted to check your email, look at the weather, get your stock quotes, see the top news stories, that may have taken 5 to 10 page views maybe 5 years ago, and you can get all that on one page view today. So even when you capture the right, it was 5 in 3, right, the numbers that you're actually measuring are changing over time. And we're going to see that as, so the web is moving towards television. It's going to be called addressable TV. But essentially, it's going to be interactive television where they're going to take these same types of tools and bring it to your home box office. So when that happens, it's, again, going to change all of these weightings because people are going to begin to try to leverage what they're showing you on the TV online and vice versa. And so we're going to see another convergence of interactive ads. So instead of having a static ad banner, it's going to be a more engaging ad banner. Just like you see immersive content today with advertising, there's little links sometimes on news articles. And you hover over and up comes an ad. Well, we're going to see something similar in television shows, right? You'll be able to mouse over the guy's jacket, in the middle of a chase scene. Oh, I like that leather coat, and they'll say, oh, you can get it at the Gap for, $9.99. So we're going to see a lot of this technology come into play over the next few years, and that's why, again, if anyone is looking for careers, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in online marketing. All right, so the third, and there's one more approach I'll just briefly mention, but the third and what I think is the best approach is the predictive approach to trying to guess what people are interested in. So this is the bias slide that I mentioned. There'll be one more marketing slide after this, again, which I'm contractually obligated to show you guys. But if we look at the comparison again between cluster, business rules, and predictive, the cluster, right, everyone was in one segment, and it was automated. Business rules, everyone was in lots of segments, but it was manual. So what if we could automate and be in lots of segments at the same time? That's kind of predictive. So the other kind of chief difference between this approach and the others is this is the only approach that has the marketer's goal built in to how we classify people. So in the cluster approach, we're just saying, how are people different? Let's try to group them into exclusive clusters that have distances that are really far apart and centroids that are kind of tight. Business rules, it's some mad scientists coming up with random rules and testing them and figuring out what rules work. But if we could automate that, it's very similar to what the predictive approach is doing, saying let's look backwards from what a marketer classifies as a good event, and then we'll automate that, and constantly, as the web changes, we'll evolve with that. And we'll constantly test, is it 3 and 5 or 5 and 3, and we'll figure out what that does.